we can use to compare players across different positions, different position groups, different individual skill levels, etc. We also have high-speed distance yards, and this is tracking how distance in yards, how much of that is being run at a certain high speed that's set by the device that has it at default. So it's comparing that speed against what they're actually running, and then if it's over that, it'll be calculated as high-speed distance yards. So those are some of the things we use on that. And this catapult device is really cool because it can be used in practice sessions, conditioning sessions, and games as well. So we got to see a little bit of that when we do the dashboards demonstration in a little bit. We also have the Tendo device, which this one is, as you can see by the picture, a lot different than the catapult. This one has a little string that ties onto the end of barbells when you're doing bench presses or squats. And of course, the players are doing those, and it's measuring things like velocity and power of different exercise reps that they're putting in. And it's mainly used, for, like I said, bench press and squats. So that's the Tendo device, and we have some dashboards on that as well that we've done for the football team. And these are two of the newer ones that they added in this year and they started using this year. So the first one there is called the Nord board. This one is testing or looking at hamstring strength, because if you follow football, you might know that a lot of different players either pull their hamstrings or get different hamstring injuries. And of course, the football team doesn't want that. So this is designed to measure hamstring strength and also looking at things like force that's being used and put out by the hamstrings, different power metrics, as well as imbalance. Because if your hamstrings are imbalanced, then one might be doing more work than the other, and that can cause injury as well. And in that picture there, you can see that he is doing something called the Nordic test, I believe, which you can see that his legs or his feet are kind of hooked in there, and he's kind of, bending over like this. I guess they can't really do it standing, but you can. You kind of get the gist of it. Yeah, maybe another day, unfortunately. But yeah, so that's what that is looking like there, and that's testing all the different things that we just went over. And finally, we have the force stacks, and essentially this is being used for testing the strength in jumps and the power that they're putting out by their jumps. So this is cool because this is really good for comparing within position groups, because of course, if you're comparing like a wide receiver to a defensive lineman, there might be some difference in their jumping ability. But we're testing two defensive linemen against each other, then you can kind of start to see who might be jumping better than the other lineman. And so that is being shown by the force stacks here, looking at power, jump heights, and other metrics as such. So after they gave us that problem and they gave us the ask to do this, how do we go about getting the data into dashboards? Of course, the football team doesn't have a database administrator that they have on staff and use regularly, but what they do have is student workers, and I swear I'm not one of them. That life is behind me. But yeah, the student workers are really good at putting the data, just copying and pasting it into Google Sheets. And that allows us to have different spreadsheets for each of the different devices that we use. And then that is put into our Aurora user databases, or AUDB, using Alteryx workflows. So that's just taking the data from Google Sheets and putting it into the databases. Very simple. And then by being in AUDB, the data is, if you've ever used the Aurora databases, you can query it using structured query language or SQL, but we're not using that for this project. Instead, we have a live connection to a Tableau dashboards that we use. And that is very seamless. It's very automatic, gets updated twice a day, and it allows us to look at data regularly over time. And so now I'll go into the dashboard demo.
One thing that's really interesting about that setup, you hear the term over-engineering, right? Where you make things a little overly complex. We didn't want to do that because they're not going to be able to troubleshoot and fix database issues. Like, again, they're great folks, but they're not like hardcore database people. And so we built what looks like an overly simplistic copy data to a spreadsheet, and then a machine copies it to database, but it works. It works for the scenario. So that was a really nice setup.
And so we'll show you all a couple dashboards here. The first one is the session stats. So these dashboards, they look at data across different instances. This one here is looking at data for one individual workout, but for all the players at once. And you can kind of compare visually here. So this one is looking at the Catapult device, the first one that we went over on the devices slide. And you can see, first off, they have workout minutes, the total player load that we talked about. You can see that high speed distance yards here. And like I said, really good for, it groups it by position, and then you can see all the players for that position as such. We also have these filters on the side. So of course you can look at this. You can look at these metrics. You can adjust your date ranges and choose your individual workout or game. So for this presentation, I was able to look at this game from October 8th. If you follow the football team, this is when we beat the University of Washington in that really high scoring game where the backup quarterback had to come in. And it was a really great, exciting shootout there. But this is for, one instance, and across these different date filters, you can pick any of these other things that fall within these dates here. But we'll keep looking at this University of Washington game for now. You can also filter if you want by workout type when you're going through this filter, as well as squad. And squad is just the term that we use in these dashboards for the position groups. So like skill offense would be looking at wide receivers. Meanwhile, big defense might be looking at defensive linemen, people on the front lines. Same with big offense and all these other squads listed here. So that is the Catapult stats, or the session
This
stats.
is actual data, but names have been changed using fake names. So we don't have a quarterback named Aaron George or whatever it might be. So, but these are actual data from the devices.
That's a good point. So we'll filter this one down because this one is looking, you can see it's a lot of different games in it. Were in my filters from before, unfortunately. There we go. Okay. So the difference here in this set, or this dashboard, this is called workouts over time. And this is looking at, you see the players and the positions here, but it's looking at one specific metric. So instead of the session stats dashboard that I just showed you that has all the different metrics listed out, but just for one instance, this is looking at a certain time range that you put in, but it's only measuring one metric, or it's looking at one metric. So for this presentation, I picked high speed distance that we can look at. So you can see here the comparison over time of the different, the amount of yards that they ran at a high speed distance, like I went over earlier. So like for this one, I put in October 1st through the 9th. So you can see all the different games, the practices, the conditioning sessions that were in this date range. So if we pick out Fred Jonesy here, we can see that on October 4th, he ran 19 yards of high speed distance, but in a game, or actually he didn't have, I guess he didn't play, unfortunately, but Scott Coulter right above him, he did practice on this day at 99 high speed distance yards, but in the game, he ran 161 high speed distance yards. And so this is really good. If you've ever heard the concept load management in the NBA, they use this, NFL, across all different sports at this point. And it's kind of looking at making sure that players aren't overexerting themselves. This is a great way to do that. Sure. So, like I was saying, load management is great for preventing injuries and making sure players aren't overexerting themselves. So this is a great example of how we can do that. And third, for this section of the demonstration, third and finally, we will look at the player profile. So the cool thing about this one is now we're looking at different metrics. We're looking at the date ranges here, but we're only doing it for one specific player. So here we have James Hoffman selected, and we have our new data sources here. So this is not only looking at the Catapult now. The Catapult, you might have recognized some of the names of these metrics over here, like workout minutes, total player load, high speed distance on the right here. And so that's measured on this Catapult section over here. But we now have these KPIs right at the top for some of their different stats from the Catapult device. And we also have the new ones that we added in this year. So NordBoard and the ForceDex, which if you don't remember from the devices screen, this is used for hamstring testing. And the ForceDex are used for jumping strength and power. And what the football team ran into with this one is they only test at certain points of the year. They're not testing very regularly. Like they might have one testing session in January or another in March. And so we kind of group those together, and it's looking at the maximum here for that testing session, and you can compare across. So for James Hoffman, for the NordBoard device, we have March 2022 selected for their B tests and January 2022 selected for their A tests. And you can kind of compare across here. And what's another cool part about this dashboard is for these individual stats on this part, these gold triangles represent the averages for their position group. So you can really easily compare between this player, James Hoffman, and he's a wide receiver. So this is going to be looking at that skill offense position group, or all the other wide receivers that are on the team. And so that's kind of, yeah, that's the average for him. And it does the same thing for the 4 stacks, same evaluation periods. You can select different ones here, and it's looking at those averages as well. And so now that we have done that, we can go into the next part. So all that was said and done last year. They kind of waited, kept using those over time. But then they came back to us when I joined the team in January afterwards. They came back to us a few months later and they said, we want to kind of dive into this load management concept more. The problem that they were seeing is that players were overexerting themselves in practice still, and they wanted a more practical way to look at it, which was kind of telling them, look, I just want to be able to see if a player is exerting themselves in a certain metric by maybe 20% or more from the previous session. So we're like, we can do that. So we created a warnings dashboard that, like I said, would indicate over time if a player measured in at 20% or more from one practice to the next, or one game to the next, or practice to game, etc. So we can kind of jump in here. By the way, before I go on, does anyone have any questions about any of these, the session stats, workouts over time, or the player profile? Yeah.
How much access do players have to the data?
So the question was, how much access do the players have to these data? And the answer is none, unless the coaches showed it to them. So this is for, there's 3 core coaches, the strength and training coaches. This is for them. If they want to sit down with a player, they can. The players don't have access to this dashboard because they can't log into their computer and see it. But if the coach wants to share, like that player profile one that we're showing right here, there's a point in the season where I imagine it's like when there's fraternity rush or sorority rush, where they put your picture on the screen and everyone talks about you. They do that with the players. They put their data up and the coaches and teams talk about them. So this is really meant for the coaches. I've heard them say that they do share with players, but I don't have a good idea of whether there's an uptake on that or not.
Any other
questions?
Cool. All right, then I will move on here. So like I said, the first 3 dashboards that I showed you and some of these other ones on the side were all created last year. And then we added this warnings dashboard. So this one, very simple. You can filter by player name if you want to select different players to look at individually. But right now we have all the players selected, and we have those date filters that we saw earlier. But like I said, this has all the names on the side of all the players, looking at the date range that we put in. And this little dot shows, it represents a warning. So the tooltip here in Tableau can really help us look at the things that we need to. So it shows the date, the high-speed distance yards, and oh yeah, it's looking at high-speed distance like we were talking about earlier, and player load as well. So this is taking stats from that catapult device. These are the first 2 metrics that they wanted to test. We might be adding some more down the road, but right now these are the only 2 we have in there. So like I said, this one has the date in there, the high-speed distance yards that they run, which is 151 yards. And you can see that the previous workout, they might have not run any high-speed distance yards, so it's showing 0, but let me find one that does have one. Okay, perfect. So for David Stocks here on player load, his total player load for October 8th was 534. And that's great, right? But it's not great when you compare it to his previous workout, which is only 372. So what does that mean, right? That's looking at, okay, we can infer from the previous demonstration that October 8th was a game, and maybe the 372 came from a previous practice. And so from there, we can see how much more they're putting in total player load in this game. And so maybe that's making them more exhausted. Maybe that's putting strain on their muscles, different parts of their body. And so while that's, expected in a game, we don't want them to be doing that too much. Or here, for example, this is probably looking at a practice. Yeah, because October 5th is the last one. So from October 4th to 5th here for Jason Campos, this was within practices, right? So this is also concerning, potentially concerning if they have a bunch of dots in a row. So maybe if they have 2 or 3 in a row, that could be cause for concern. That might mean that they are more prone to small injuries that even though they're small, they'll keep them out of games, or potentially bigger injuries that might keep them out for longer periods of time. So for this one, a total player load of 575 compared to the previous workout of 333. So while this dashboard is very simple, it's great at allowing the football team to quickly go, hey, this player is overexerting themselves. Maybe the next practice will tell them to kind of chill out a little bit, maybe work not as hard or do a little bit less reps of different things so that in the future for games, they're more rested and more prepared to perform their best and they're not exhausted or being overexerted in the past. So that is the warnings dashboard. And now, if I can select all tab correctly, I will give it back to Mike for closing.
Question, is there a way that you guys wouldn't set that up to where it doesn't compare games with practices?
So the question was, is there a way we can set up the warning so that doesn't compare a practice to a game? Kinda, yeah. So the device has no idea what it's measuring, right? Those labels that say 10-8 game, 10-5 practice, the folks and the strength and performance put that in there. So we could feasibly, because they put a type, but they just type in game, we could say only show games, only show practices. So going back to the comment before of, we sort of did this like by hand, like they type in game. If someone types in games plural, then it's a different category than game, right? There's no logic built into this. So yes, we could, because they manually put in this was a game or this was a practice. Yeah. Right. You're working a lot. Yep.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they could
That's
see
totally
when you saw like the 10-8 was the game, there were lots of dots going down vertically because guys are busting their hump during games, working a lot harder. But if you see it, and so the nice thing is for us looking at this, some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't. For Clayton, the assistant coach for strength and training, he gets it. Like he's there. He was at all these practices. He was at this game. He knows the players. So he's got a different eye than you do, which is perfect. Like, one really great thing of how this developed, it was very, very iterative and collaborative. So they didn't come to us with a 5-page spec saying, I want a dashboard that does this. Like I went down there 2 years ago and like saw the device and he logged me into the vendor's website that had all the data. He downloaded the data to a spreadsheet and showed me. So we started with just like pieces of stuff. But we worked so iteratively, like we put together a first cut at the dashboard and then we changed stuff. And like what Lucas said with the warnings, did somebody jump by 20%? That wasn't a thing. That wasn't in a book anywhere. But after a year and a half of using this, he's like, yeah, I find myself looking to see if anybody jumped up in load. So I was on this dashboard and then I would look at practice 1 and then I would go to practice 2 and I would see if the number jumped. And we're like, we could build that in for you. So the whole thing was they didn't know, right? This wouldn't work if we said, fill out this 5-page document with your specifications of what you want. And I'm guessing a lot of you are familiar with that as data practitioners, and that it is very iterative. You don't always know what you want. There's no way, right? Call it agile, call it what you want. And just been really good to work with the team on that level. The other key thing on this is, and I'll point out Clayton Curvin, who's the assistant coach for strength and performance training, like he wants this stuff. He's the one who said, I want to have the data. I got these wearables. I'm going to use them. You might have old school people who are like, oh, I just, drive these guys and I know who's good and who's not good. He's like, no, I want to see data. I want to use it. So kudos to him for doing that. So, it's been a really good relationship. That's probably the biggest takeaway, is how we can provide value with these folks, because they know the players, they know strength and performance training. We know data, we know visualizations and dashboard, and you put that kind of chocolate and peanut butter together, and it's been a really good relationship. Other questions? Questions about the data, the tools, the team? So I haven't heard, the other big one is basketball, and kind of a sidebar on that, nothing with ASU basketball, but the Suns contacted us, and much of an aside here. They have a practice center over at 40th and Camelback, the Verizon 5G Performance Center. Those courts are wired with cameras. So, motion capture, the morph suit and the ping pong balls when someone's playing, a monster in a movie. And so then you can see the camera captures it and you get a stick figure moving and all that. They can do that without having the basketball players wearing ping pong balls. So the cameras themselves are angles where they can capture. So if somebody is shooting, it's capturing knees, elbows, wrists, all those angles. So they contacted us, one, just manual labor to help kind of click on the iPads and gather it, but then potentially to actually work on it. So I've been in contact with them, and it was funny. It was like, oh, we got to the playoffs, so we're busy now. Oh, we lost in the playoffs, get back to me soon. Oh, our owner had some stuff and he's going to sell the team, get back to me. So we've been pushing that off. So I'm trying to see if I can get Lucas a job as an NBA data analyst. That's my only goal in life. And he's being very patient with me. So yes, that's a Sun story, but nothing else I've heard of from the within ASU. So the question was, do the warnings and alerts become like push notifications? They're not. This isn't kind of like, I need to know now. Because if you think about it, you've got your practices, the data gets put in, we run the data, they put the data into a Google Sheet. We have a job that twice a day, like 8 a.m. and 2 p.m., checks the Google Sheet and refreshes it. So that's only updated twice a day. It's not the kind of thing where like, I need to know now, somebody is, I was going to say Jaden. I'm like, no, that's not our quarterback. I need to know now if somebody kind of pushed it on it. So theoretically, we can, because the data are there. Alteryx does a good job of munging the data, so it could kind of send an email out of something, but we don't. So the question was, have the coaches been tracking injuries? Great question. So the short answer is not that we know of where it's tied in with this. So like that would be the ultimate. So like if they said, I'm totally making this up, last year we had 17 hamstring injuries, and this year we've only had 8 hamstring injuries, and that's because we've been tracking this load management thing. Would love it if that was the case, but it's not. How can you make, is that because we changed a coach and this coach is easier than the last coach and he's not driving as hard, right? The causality is really not there. I would love to see, because that's what you want to do, is get some sort of feedback loop to say, because we're doing this, what's the impact? A lot of times it can be qualitative. They're like, yeah, we've got a good training regimen and we know we're better about our players. But it's, as of now, no, there is no, oh, we've reduced injuries by X% because of these dashboards. And honestly, I wouldn't push for that. Like, yeah, it would be a great feather in our cap to say we helped athletics this way, but how believable is it, to say, oh, that really was the cause of this? That's kind of iffy, but you're thinking the exact way. Like, okay, so they're doing this, the qualitative way I assess it is I talk to Clayton, the coach, and say, do you feel like you're better at strength training and performance than you were without this? And he'll say yes, and I'll say, that's good for me. All right, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone.